Hello and welcome to Maltbox, the non-chill filtered whisky blog. I'm Andy and this is Whisky Review 104. What I have for you today is something quite exciting. It comes in the form of an Irish whisky from one of the newest Irish distilleries on the ever-expanding Irish whisky scene. It comes from a distillery that's trying to do things a little bit differently, and they are not ashamed of it. It comes from a distillery located in the town of Waterford. It comes from, shockingly enough, Waterford Distillery. And the whisky that I will be reviewing for you today is this. Waterford Ratheadon Irish Whisky. Now you'll notice there, single farm, Ratheadon. So that is the name of the release, because what Waterford are trying to do is basically bring it back to basics, in the sense that they are making their proposition around something called terroir. Now, I am not here to say that terroir exists, not just in whisky but in general. There's a bit of debate going on at the minute as to whether it does and whether it doesn't. I'm not going to get involved in that today. I am purely here to assess the liquid itself. Is it good liquid? Does it taste nice? Does it have good texture? Is it worth the money? That is why I am here. I will expand a little bit on terroir because you will need a bit of background to it. So, in simple terms, this will be pretty simple because my knowledge around terroir, my expertise of the concept of terroir is quite basic, which I imagine is the same for a lot of you guys out there who tend to drink whisky. Terroir is generally associated with the wine industry. And what terroir is, in its loosest sense, from a complete and utter amateur, which is pretty much me in every walk of life, it's in essence what the surroundings, the sense of place, and the physical attributes of the location of either a product that goes into a final product or a product itself has been grown. So I mentioned it was realistically at the moment generally associated with the wine industry. That's because people say certain vines in certain soils, so loamy soils, sandy soil, clayey soil, dry with pebbles, you name it, grow sure, compost, whatever it may be, they say that that imparts different characteristics into the grapes that grow on those vines, because the grapes are getting different varying nutrients and things like that. And weather, south of France, quite hot, nice and Mediterranean, north of France, not so much. And Waterford's concept is exactly that, but around barley. So what they are trying to say is that each farm, each field that they will be getting their barley from will have some form of influence from where it's come from in that farm/field. So it's an experiment. There are 3 releases coming out very shortly. So I'm kind of reviewing this now because they're about to be released. Now Ratheadon is actually a release that is going to be exclusive, I believe, now to Ireland and online, I think. I think that was the intention. It was originally going to be on an online release, but I'm not too sure if they're just dragging that back to Ireland now. And there's 2 other releases as well. So I can tell you what those are. Just have a quick look at my phone because I've got that open for exactly this scenario. So the other 2 releases are Bannow Island and Ballykilcavan. So in order to kind of prove this theory, or not prove it, as the case may be, again, I'm not here to judge on that part, terroir is not on my agenda today, they have tried to basically keep the processes, the strengths, etc., and particularly the barley strain, obviously, the same. So I'm going to show you now the back of this bottle. Now, this is a sample I received with other samples from Waterford. They reached out to me and asked if I'd like some of these to take a look at. I accepted. However, just because I've been provided with this sample does not mean that it will be getting a favourable review. And as you know, guys, I say that as a general blurb that I say about any time I receive a sample, because integrity is everything. So, on the back, it's a lot to read, isn't it? You need a bookmark. So, there is your barley variety, Irina 2015. So, this was basically drawn on the 22nd of October. 20th, oh, it's backwards for me. 22nd of October 2019. That right there, the farm location, that is the GPS coordinates for the farm. That's mad. That's madness. That's pretty accurate. That I'm gonna have to do it. Fill date 25th of May 2016. Apologies, that was my work phone going off. The spirit age 3 years old. So this is a 3-year-old whiskey. Now, cask composition. 35% American oak, 20% American new oak, 25% French, and 20% VDN. Now, that was another tab that I had open on my phone, and naturally I closed it just before I pressed record. However, thanks to Google, it stands for Vin de Naturels, which is basically a sweet dessert wine. So it's quite an interesting myriad of cask maturation types there. So the cask ABV was 71.18%. The sample ABV as it stands in my glass is 50%. So, shall we get cracking? When this is released alongside its compatriots, I believe this is going to be retailing for between 70 to 79 euros. Make of that what you will in the various exchange rates on different currencies at the minute, because everything is going swimmingly with the economy. So some very nice long oily legs there on the glass. I believe it's natural colour, non-chill filtered. On the nose at 50%. Okay, so probably went in a little bit hard then. It's a 3-year-old whiskey, it's 50%, it's quite prickly, quite astringent initially. Got a few nostril hairs singed then. There we go, that's better. Okay, so it's almost got quite a creamy thing going on, a bit grassy. It's quite floral. It's quite, I think the best way to describe my initial impression is it's clean. It's very clean. It's almost vodka-esque in a sense. Because you do find that some of the better vodkas have that kind of nice creaminess to it. There is also, in line with that, I'm not going to put this down to the T word or the influence that it has, but the barley itself I think is kind of coming through, it's quite apparent, but I'm thinking more along the lines of something like in a porridge or something, or maybe pearl barley, which is something you use in stews. It is quite floral and you know, again, very clean. I am going to try it again with water as well for the benefit of seeing if that changes things. So, on the palate, okay, good mouthfeel. A nice oily viscous mouthfeel, which I really like. Oh, alright. Okay. Sorry, that's new. Initially, again, clean. Very clean. Very crisp. Interestingly, the guys at Waterford are not utilising triple distillation, which is something that a lot of Irish whisky has been associated with in the past. Don't get me wrong, not all Irish whisky is triple distilled. That is a complete and utter myth and massive misinformation. Waterford are utilising double distillation, which is what the majority of Scotch distilleries do, apart from Auchentoshan and Springbank when they do their hazel burn run on triple distillation. On the palate, there was that initial clean, crisp, cut, grassy hit. It then got a little bit herby, thinking like dried oregano or something like that. Not fresh, quite dry. Because, and I say dry because instantly, as it went into the finish, you might notice that I kind of pulled a bit of a face because it went quite bitter quite quickly and quite dry. The finish is very long, it's warming, it's 50%, it's a young whisky. Inevitably, that's probably par for the course. It kind of, I don't know what to say, it's kind of like, it's not like any other whisky that I have tried. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not too sure yet, if I'm being honest. I'm going to go back in. Let's go back in. Okay. Just going back on the nose there. There's definitely the porridge there, but possibly rather than wet porridge, well, dry porridge. So dry porridge oats, and also some apple peel. So not the nice juicy, crisp, sweet apple on the inside, but actually the peel, the sort of like waxiness, if you know what I mean. If you ever peeled apples to make apple pie, you'll see what I mean. Ah, okay. It's like Jekyll and Hyde sometimes. Massive floral hit right up front there. It's like a flash, like that. And it's gone now. It's gone back to that quite crisp, clean spirit at the end, and the bitterness hasn't hit me this time in the finish. On that palate right up front, potpourri, floral in the extreme. I don't use potpourri in whisky reviews generally because I don't eat it very often. It's not really my go-to snack. But potpourri, really intense potpourri, incredibly floral on the palate there. Very interesting, very strange, but very, very interesting. So I am going to top this up again a little bit because I'm going to put some water in just to see what that does to it. So only literally another half measure there, and I'll probably use half a teaspoon initially, which should be enough. So there we go. Just a couple of drops there, guys. So somebody, we had a discussion the other day actually about me and a couple of mates in the whisky community around teaspooning and pipettes. Some people like pipettes, I like teaspoons because A, I've got a lot of teaspoons, my supply of pipettes is somewhat limited, and also after 12, 13, however many years of drinking whisky, I've kind of got to a point now where I know when I hit certain qualities or certain not qualities in some cases, and also certain strengths, certain distillery characteristics. I kind of know now how much I need to put in, if that makes sense, from a teaspoon perspective. As a teaspoon user, God, can you imagine? While that's opening up, moving on from teaspoons, comment your favourite spoon. A little bit more about Waterford. So the distillery itself is headed up by Mark Raynier, who is obviously very well known for his previous involvement at Bruichladdich. He's basically the guy that kick-started their revolution, so to speak, into the distillery that we know and love today. And on the subject of Bruichladdich, this thing around terroir and provenance, which is probably a good word for it if we're not going to, debate the T word. Provenance. Bruichladdich have done something similar. You only need to look at their Isle Barley releases. Look at, for example, the 2007, which I think was Rockside Farm. You've then since had the 2011, the 2009, 2010, etc. So it's not necessarily a new concept, but Waterford are going to the extreme with it. They, I believe, are actually paying to have a study undertaken to prove that this exists in the whisky world, in terroir exists. The distillery itself used to be a brewery. So it was a brewery that I think was built, when was it? Something like 20-something? Can't remember, could be before that. But basically, the guys behind Waterford, because they've got they've got some bump behind them. That company bought the brewery. It was owned by Diageo, and they've converted it into a distillery. So bought it in 2015, and this was their sort of like brainchild. This is what they've sort of progressed with, and here we are, one of their first releases. And it is a privilege to try it because, to be fair, it's very difficult to come by. It's not out yet. It's been a distillery that's had a lot said about it. A lot of people are debating, both for and against, and it's quite an interesting discussion. It's been probably one of the most active discussions in recent years in the whisky community. So, again, now it's had a bit of time to open up. Let's see what we've got on the nose. It's softened it, definitely. It's not as astringent, it's not as prickly. Those apples are still there, or the apple peel is still there. The porridge oats are still there. The floral aspect is still there, and I'm thinking something along the lines of jasmine. Now, I don't want to sound like a prat, but the reason I know that is because I've got a massive jasmine in my back garden, and it smells just like that at night. Jasmine's a really nice sort of like light, and again, quite clean scent, and that sort of like cleanliness runs through this spirit. Now, there's not really apart from that, there's not really too much on there, to be honest. But I do feel like I could probably approach it a little bit easier, because that nose initially was very, very strong in the sense of the literal strength was very, very intense. On the palate, okay, interesting. Again, the potpourri right at the front, still a flash in the pan. It still goes quickly, but it's still there, and it kind of spoils it for me, to be honest. But there are some nicer notes towards the end. Again, nice creaminess. It's actually creamier with water than it was without. You've got that, again, quite clean, crisp cereal note. Arguably a tiny, tiny little smidgen of citrus. I can't quite pinpoint what citrus type, to be honest. Could be orange peel, to be fair. And the finish, much more approachable, much more pleasant, creamy, a little bit of vanilla, and again quite grassy. It's a very light spirit. I believe that's the intention. I couldn't tell you. It's quite interesting to compare this to a couple of young whiskies that I've been trying and reviewing recently. I mean, just look at the Bimber ex-bourbon, completely different beast. Even the Filey Bay Muscatel finish, again, a young whiskey, different again. It's an interesting concept. Now, I'm not going to get involved in the tea debate. However, I guess you do have a slight difference when it comes to whiskey making that you do to wine making, in the sense that obviously you don't distill wine. It doesn't go through two stills. It doesn't go through a wash still and a spirit still. And depending, I suppose it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because if you're saying that, the conditions and the soil, etc., in which this barley is grown in is going to have a say in the final product, I mean, you will have to, but they're trying to keep the processes exactly the same. You are going to have to change those processes, because you might have a very dry summer in one part of the country, a wet summer in another, and the barley will grow differently, and it will bring up to different, tolerances. And again, I mean, you get frosts in May and, right up to the end of May, which could have an impact on that as well, which then may knock on, by default, your actual distilling process, be it around fermentation or what it actually does off the still. So the jury's out on that debate, obviously, and I'm not getting involved in that. But the whiskey itself, It's got good qualities. I'm going to go back for one last sip. Ah, damn, it's there again. It's got good qualities. So, going back to what I was saying about the potpourri, I'm not going to ramble on for too much longer. It reminds me very much of a problem that Bowmore and Auchentoshan had in the 90s when they were owned by Morrison. So they had an issue that kept cropping up. So if you buy a Bowmore or an Auchentoshan bottling from, say, the early 90s, so it's distilled in the early 90s, you'll potentially find some references online to something called FWP, which isn't a particularly pleasant phrase. The FWP stands for French Hors Perfume. And because, for some reason, in their infinite wisdom, their approach to distillation methods and fermentation and a couple of other bits and pieces that had an impact, such as cask management, resulted in quite an unpleasant perfume flavour, and I have experienced it firsthand in a single cask 27-year-old Auchentoshan that was bottled a few years ago by Whisky Broker, I think it was, in a square bottle. And it reminds me of that in the sense that it's so strong, that potpourri. It's just like, boom, it just takes your attention away from everything else. You're just sort of left in a bit of shock. But then it does go quite quickly. Texture's great. The concept itself, out for debate. But thank you very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Appreciate it was a bit of a wordy review, but obviously with a subject like this, it's incredibly difficult to try and cram it into 10 minutes. But again, thank you very much for watching. See you soon.